Hello there, my friends. I just wanted to do a quick introduction to this week's podcast. It's with a dear friend of mine, Bob Burg. You know, when I first started a website called Little Conversations Today, Bob Burg was actually the third person I spoke to on that website, but he was the first real author, like the first well-known, successful author that I'd ever spoken to that I didn't already know, which created this anxiety and this buildup. I mean, my hands were sweating. It was all sorts of crazy stuff that was going on in my body when I first was able to speak to him. You know, and after speaking with Bob numerous times now, I've become truly, he's near and dear to my heart with the way he gives to people. And this podcast is no different. It was an original, a Google Plus Hangout that we did that was a webinar. And I kind of went back into the archives and I said, you know, as we're leading into December, as we're leading into Christmas, I wanted to give you guys something fun this week on the podcast. I wanted to give you, something enjoyable. And I couldn't think of anything better than my dear friend Bob Burg. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. I really do. And if you like this kind of stuff, I encourage you to sign up for HPLS Monthly, because this is the kind of stuff that you get at HPLS Monthly on the back end when you're an insider, when you're a member. You get free videos like this of things that I've done that I really think will bring energy, passion, joy, and excitement to your life, to your career in sales, and to your overall enjoyment in the business, in the transportation and logistics business. So I encourage you, grab your pen and paper, bust out your journal, whatever it is that you do, fire up Evernote, fire up a Word document, fire up a Pages document, whatever you do, however you take your information in, and enjoy, because Bob shares so much in this. It's a back and forth conversation, whether you're watching this on video or on the podcast. Enjoy, my friends. Until the next time, remember, go out there and make every day, every call an educational one, and crush your sales. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. Hi everybody, Dan Deigan here, and I apologize for the late start. We had just a little bit of a technical difficulty going on. We've lost Bob for the present time, but that's okay. Bob's going to be right back with us. So I'll just introduce myself quickly for those of you that might have come across this live cast on maybe our social media, maybe a link that a friend sent you. Today we've got the 4 pillars of stratospheric sales with Bob Burg. Now, if you don't know who Bob Burg is, or if you've never had the pleasure of reading Bob's books, Bob has written numerous books, co-authored The Go-Giver and Go-Giver Sell More with a gentleman named John David Mann. However, Bob does have Adversaries into Allies, Endless Referrals, what is the other one? The Art of Persuasion, and also with John David Mann, he wrote It's Not About You. Bob's been in sales for years and years. And today, what we're going to do is we've broken it out into 4 pillars of sales. Now, when we get into these 4 pillars, you're going to see there's a lot of content to cover. So I'm hoping we get Bob back on this line real quick, because when we start getting into this, I'm telling you, this is the kind of stuff that is truly going to take your sales to an entirely new level. And it's fairly simple ideas and concepts. The problem is that a lot of time in sales, like if you're in sales, obviously, there's some fears or there's some anxiety that goes along when we cold call, or there's fear and anxieties when we talk about the belief systems and individuals that have different belief systems than we do. And they're not necessarily either good or bad, they're just different. So when Bob gets on here, we're going to start with cold calling, because, I mean, really, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? If we can increase our productivity and cold call a little more, a little better maybe, if we eliminated those fears and issues that come along with cold calling, we can drastically change things, and we can drastically change them in so many ways. There's different steps to cold calling. Is there maybe different ways that we can take these cold calls and really dig into them? So what we're going to do is I'm going to just, for 1 second, look and see where Bob is at here. And I apologize for all of this. Bob and I were on, and then I realized I logged in as the wrong person, and Bob's gone. So we will get him back here ASAP. Isn't this unusual to do a live cast? Isn't this great? Live kind of TV kind of thing. So now I'm calling Bob Burg on the phone here. And trust me, this isn't some kind of hype setup to get things going in a faster way here. We're just going to get Bob back on the horn because we really want to get this going. Enjoyable standing here staring at me? We've got tons of people on this live cast, and this is what has to happen, right? All right, well, Bob's still not there. All right, so what we're going to do is I will start for Bob, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'll start, like I said, with the elephant in the room when it comes to cold calling. And, you know, I've been in sales now going on 20 years, and, you know, I had the opportunity of getting into transportation sales. And, you know, it's funny when it comes to beliefs, and we're going to talk about beliefs in the second pillar, but when it comes to beliefs about ourselves and what we're truly capable of, there was a gentleman who saw something in me that I didn't really see in myself. And I thought I was a good talker. I was one of those kids that kind of, you know, was a mover and shaker, but I never really saw the value that he saw in me. And when he saw it, it was a life-changing experience, because I got into the world of transportation and soon realized that, you know, when you're dealing with so many different people in sales, so many really amazing things can happen. Okay, but one thing I did find is that the feelings that I had about cold calling, you know, that almost that feeling like you're telemarketing, and you know, everyone that's listening on this live cast probably has those same feelings where, you know, are you disturbing somebody, pissing somebody off, whatever the case may be. But those feelings are very critical when it comes to cold calling, because those feelings in turn control your thoughts control your actions, right? Your thoughts control your feelings control your actions. They're all linked simultaneously. So when your feelings about cold calling really are disturbing, are, you know, fearful, if you will, it can truly change the dynamics of the entire perspective, if you will, of calling. Okay, and that brings us right into that fear, right? That fear of cold calling, that idea of either you're aggravating somebody, you're bugging somebody. I mean, in transportation, as I'm sure it is in every other industry, you know, we'll speak to logistics managers, traffic managers, whatever the quote-unquote title is, and first thing I ask them is, like, haven't you been called 100 times today? And, you know, a lot of them go, no, 200, because everybody's out to get that new business. But what is it that you can offer that they can't? And when we take that fear out of the equation and we start really looking at, you know, digging down deep and saying, what is it that I can offer? What is my unique special gift that I have for these individuals? That's where that really starts getting eliminated, because now you're operating in a completely different understanding, a different perspective. And then the third one is obviously the belief, because when you start operating in this different perspective, your belief changes about what you're truly capable of. And your, you know, call it script, I don't necessarily like the word script, but your approach and your demeanor and your confidence level builds, because the belief in yourself starts to rise, starts to become this unbelievable, unstoppable force, if you will. And the second one is, and everyone in sales that's looking at this, is the cold calling excuses, right? I mean, these are abundant, the excuses. Well, you know, it's in California and it's only 9 o'clock now, so I'll give it a little bit. Then the phone rings and then you go out for lunch with your friends, or you get called into a meeting, or whatever the case may be, or whatever happens, all of a sudden now you're stuck. You're done, right? And, you know, when it comes to those excuses, this is so unbelievably abundant in every salesperson's life, I believe. I just recently, for the last month and a half, every day when I was doing sales, I stopped, and when I kind of made this excuse to myself, I wrote it down. And I think I had, over a month and a half, 127 different excuses. Now, I was present to it, so I saw those excuses and said, okay, well, you know what, time to change those excuses and time to really rejuvenate them a little bit. And I changed those excuses into something that actually stopped me and said, okay, here's great content for this live cast. Here's great content for my programs that are going to be coming out shortly. Here's great content for da-da-da-da, you name it. But also, here's a massive opportunity to become fully aware. All right, the debacle's almost over. Bob's going to get out and get back in. So I appreciate you all listening to me share this information with you, and when Bob comes back on, we're going to actually get him and go over these feelings. So we're going to run probably a little later than 20 minutes today because we're sitting at 12 minutes after 12 Eastern Standard Time right now, and I really want you guys to kind of run through this information with Bob. So we've got Bob with us now. Bob, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Dan?
We sure can, Bob. Now, Bob, I do apologize. I wasn't logged in as the admin. I was actually logged in as an attendee, which is why I couldn't necessarily start the talking and start the actual live cast. So, Bob, what we did is I briefly introduced you, kind of gave everybody a good idea about your books, and then what I did is I went over the elephant in the room, which is what was going to be our first pillar. Instead of standing here like a bump on the log, considering we are live, I can't just pause, put on a cool video or something. So, Bob, let's dive right into it. Everybody meet Bob. Bob, meet everybody that's attending.
Hi, everybody. Great to imagine I'm seeing you.
So, Bob, cold calling. Let's talk about the elephant in every room in sales. What are some of the feelings, or I'm going to say, what are some of the feelings that you've seen in your entire career of all your coaching and your books and everybody, all the seminars you've given, all the speeches you've given? What are some of the feelings of lack or disbelief that a lot of salespeople have when it comes to cold calling? What is their initial response?
Well, it's the same thing I went through when I was in local sales, direct sales, and had to do cold calling myself. I mean, there are feelings of, and I think the second point, fear, is what it all comes down to for most people when they're cold calling. I mean, hey, we're human beings, right? So there's a fear of what? Rejection. You're calling someone who, and there's different types of cold calling. The person who is calling people about an offer that person probably isn't interested in, and is calling them at home, and is they're bothering them during dinner or something like that. That's even tougher because they're really getting people slamming the phone on them, or maybe even cursing at them or insulting them or what have you. But even when you're calling business to business and calling companies, there's still that fear of rejection. I don't think anybody likes to be told no. There are people who handle it better than others, but I don't think it's something that most people intuitively like. We're human beings, and we are, generally speaking, people pleasers, and we want to be liked. And typically people who are cold calling are not necessarily liked by the person that they're calling. A good friend of mine, Andrea Waltz, she and her husband Richard Fenton wrote a great book called Go for No. And it's a business parable, a business fable. And they talk about the basic premise is that yes is the destination, no is how you get there. So they show us not just how to accept the no's and deal with the no's, but how to actually embrace the no's as a stepping stone. And it's a terrific book. And there's, of course, people who specialize in teleselling. People like Art Subcheck and Wendy Weiss and many great people who can supply you with the skills to do that. But, I don't care who you are, for most of us, there's a fear involved because we know that rejection is absolutely a part of cold calling. That said, when done correctly, it can still be, and it is, a very, very effective way to prospect and begin the relationship.
All right, so then, Bob, I mean, you touched on the feelings, and you also, in that touch on, you spoke about the fears. How can we start, or anyone on this call, the second this live cast is done, how can they start eliminating those fears associated with cold calling? And obviously this is baby steps, because if they've been in sales 20 years, they got 20 years of preconditioning of those fears. But what would be their first step?
Well, first is to, and I just had three different thoughts, so they just got mixed up in my head. So let me try to go back to where I wanted to go with them. The first one is being prepared, and that is doing the work, knowing what you have in front of you to work with, know what you're going to say, how you're going to introduce yourself, know what people are probably going to the several different ways in which they could respond and what your responses are going to be. So that's the first thing, be prepared. Second is the attitude, and that is, and this is a little bit of game playing with ourselves, but that's okay sometimes. And that is sort of a reframing, if you will, Dan, and that is to say, hey, there are a lot of things worse than this. The worst thing someone can do is say no or maybe even yell at me. But you know what? In third world countries, there are people who struggle all day just to get some clean drinking water for themselves and their families. So when you think of it, a no is really, really not a big deal. And so, you know, when it comes down to that, there's one more thing, and that is take the focus off yourself. Understand that it's not about you. So if you're really getting nervous before you call, it's because you're thinking about yourself. Instead, focus on the great value you're bringing to those people you're calling, because those people who decide to listen to you and eventually perhaps purchase the product or service you're selling, you're going to make their life a lot better. So to the degree that you can take your focus off yourself and focus on providing value to them, in other words, make it about them, not yourself, that right there is going to relieve a lot of the fear. So be prepared, reframe to understand that a no really isn't the worst thing in the world, and focus on the value you're bringing to the other person.
You know, Bob, when you say focus on the value, I immediately start thinking about belief and belief about what it is my product or service can offer people. I mean, I know going back to 2009, 2010, when I had my own transportation company, and my partners and I decided to dissolve it. I wasn't there. I was there physically, but I wasn't there in passion and excellence in the pursuit of it. It became, actually, I notice on this call today is a gentleman, Mark, that I used to work with. Fantastic. Mark and I had one of the best records for closing ever when it came to sales in our company. But it was that belief that, you know, I can't do this anymore, or my system, my setup, my calls, what I have to offer, the value I have, it's no good. And how important is that, Bob? How important is believing in your value, believing in what you can truly offer your prospect or client?
Well, you can never go any higher in terms of success than the level of your belief. So if you only believe your product or service is a certain level, you can never really go higher than that level. If you believe in your abilities as being here, you can never succeed higher than here. If you never have if you don't have the inspiration, which is tied into, you know, again, belief in what you're doing, let's say, and it's here, you can never go higher than here. So belief is always going to be that, as Dr. John Maxwell talks about in his level of 21 laws of leadership, when he talked about the law of the lid, and he talked about you can only accomplish as much as your leadership lid. So if your lid is here, you can never lead past that part. It's the same with anything else you're doing. So sure, your level of belief is what either sets an anchor or makes you 10 feet tall and bulletproof.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now we got to start moving on to the other pillars, because I know we had a late start here, and I'm very big on the whole live casts and webinars that go an hour and a half and 2 hours that just drag on, Bob. So when you understand your feelings, you're facing your fear when it comes to cold calling. We talked about the 3 different concepts we can do to start eliminating the fear. We understand about belief. Will that simply eliminate a lot of the excuses salespeople use? You know, when we were trying to reconnect you, I talked about time zones. That one was big for me when I was younger in sales and transportation. I would say, well, that client's in California, and you know, it's only 8 o'clock. I'm going to let them get a coffee, let them get settled, and then phone rings. This person, go out for lunch with a buddy, do this, do that. All of a sudden, before I know it, day's over, and it's like, well, now it's 5 o'clock my time closing, even though it is only 2 o'clock there. I'm going to go home now.
Well, you know the saying, when we tell ourselves when we rationalize, we're really doing nothing more than telling ourselves rational lies. And, we can say anything in order to justify not doing that action we don't want to do or taking that action that we don't want to take. So, sure, when we know there's something we need to do, we either do it or we don't. And if we don't, it's typically because of an excuse. So as long as we're aware of that and we're conscious that that's the case, then we're in a position to check our premises and check the other three above that and take it from there.
All right, so Bob, let's move on to the second of the four pillars, which is, a massive one because it's really the essence of what we have. When it comes to any product or service, there are other people out there selling the same product or service or something similar that can do the same thing. So in my belief, and please, Bob, by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, it comes down to this word. It comes down to value. What value are you going to provide to me, the prospect, or me, the client, that the gentleman down the road or the individual I'm dealing with right now is not provided? So pillar number one inside the second pillar value is, Bob, what is value? And I know it sounds like a pretty straightforward question, but I know you got a great answer.
Well, it's a very important question, and it's very important that we understand the difference between price and value. Price is a dollar amount. It's a dollar figure. It's finite. It is what it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of a thing to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, that brings with it so much worth or value that someone will, in this case, exchange their money for that and be glad they did, while you make a very healthy profit as well. A very quick example I would give, that I often give, is if you hire an accountant to do your taxes and the accountant charges you excuse me, $1,000. That $1,000 is his fee, or literally his price, $1,000. But what value does he give you in exchange? Well, first, through his diligence, his understanding, his years of study, his practice, he's able to save you $5,000 in taxes. He saves you countless hours of time, freeing you up to do what you would rather do or are more qualified to do. He also provides you with the security and peace of mind of knowing it was done correctly, which probably holds more value to you than even the savings. So what we see is that while, again, price is finite, value can be both concrete in terms of the $5,000 savings. It can also be conceptual in terms of the peace of mind, security, and other elements. So what he did was he gave you more in value. He gave you well over $5,000 in use value in exchange for a $1,000 price or cash value. So he gave you more in value than he took in payment. So you feel terrific about it. And he also made a very, very healthy profit, which he should. And that's the difference between price and value. One's a dollar figure. One is the perceived worth. And here's the key, Dan. Value is always in the eyes of the beholder. It's not what you think they should find valuable or should perceive to be valuable. It's what they believe is valuable. That's the key. That's why the focus always needs to be on the other person and pleasing them. In a free market-based economy, the only way you can profit is by, as one of my old mentors, Harry Brown, used to say, is by pleasing another human being, which means your focus is on bringing value to them.
Okay, Bob. Well, then, I'm looking at value from a sales perspective, and which brings up the really big question probably a lot of people on this webinar are asking is, how do we add value? Do we add it by framing the sale or framing our service, our product in a certain way? Can we add value to an individual by maybe asking certain questions? What would be your first process you would share with anyone? And obviously, we've got a lot of people on this webinar, and they're from various industries, Bob. So I know it's a very general question. But
it's okay.
What would you share as to how to add tremendous value that everyone on this call, as soon as this live cast ends, they can start implementing it in their business right now?
The principle involved, Dan, really applies regardless of the business. There's always intrinsic value with your product or service. In other words, what is it that it does provide? Okay. But again, let's go back to something you said earlier that, generally speaking, most products are pretty similar. I mean, technology has really leveled the playing field. So there might be some differences, but, all TVs pretty much work at this point. Most accountants can figure out your taxes. Most widgets are going to do what widgets are supposed to do. So if you don't separate yourself and if you don't communicate your value as being different and distinct, then what happens is you end up playing that horrible low price war, right? It goes to who could sell at the lowest price, and that's dangerous. Nobody wins in a low price war, including the customer, who typically, when you sell on too low a price, you can't service the sale properly anyway, so they don't get the value they really need. This is one reason why I say that when you sell on low price, you're a commodity. When you sell on value, you're a resource. So rather than trying to sell on low price, sell on bringing up the perceived value. Okay, and when I say perceived, by the way, I simply mean as the customer, as the client sees it. So how do we do that? Well, there are probably hundreds of ways to provide additional value, but they tend to come down to 5 what we call elements of value. And those are excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, and appreciation. And to the degree that you put those 5 into everything you do and communicate those, that's the degree that you will separate yourself from your competition.
Now, a lot of people might think this is a pretty straightforward question, Bob. What does that do to the relationship? When you add an almost unlimited amount of value, when you operate in amongst those principles we just talked about, what does that do for your relationship with your client?
Well, not only does it develop it, but it solidifies it. And when they see you as a person of value and a resource of value, as a trusted advisor, if you will, it's much less likely that anyone is ever going to be able to come along and take that person's business, regardless of the price. Now, this is why I say that all things being equal or close enough to equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. So that doesn't mean that you can simply, because you've created this wonderful relationship, you can kind of sit back on your heels and relax. No, it's a constant activity, providing value, being of value, communicating that value in everything you think and everything you say and everything you do.
Now, obviously, when it comes to that, having a client, a holistic selling approach to your client, if you will, however that may be, I mean, that's a big benefit, right, Bob? That's a huge benefit to any salesperson.
Well, it is. It tends to be that when that happens, you have yourself what I call personal walking ambassadors. And these are people who are not just satisfied with your service, they're ecstatic about it, and they're ecstatic about you, and they feel the need to tell people about you. It's sort of on a bigger scale. It's sort of like when people go to Disney World. It's not an inexpensive experience to bring your family there, certainly, but the value that you receive is much greater than the price that you pay in terms of dollars and other inconveniences. So then when people leave Disney World, not only do they want to come back, but they feel the need to tell everybody about it and why they should go as well. And you've got other companies that have developed those kind of relationships, and they do that really because their focus is on the experience. It's providing that exceptional value on an ongoing, consistent basis. It's making the entire customer experience fantastic. When you do that, now you've got people who are out there basically evangelizing for you.
All right, so then what you said about Disney World and people going out and people really talking about you leads us right into the third pillar, which you are once again another expert on, Bob, and that's referrals. And the first question is, what is the best byproduct of having referrals, and not only just referrals, but daily referrals, maybe weekly referrals. We asked a question in one of the Facebook posts and promotions that we did. You know, how many salespeople out there are actually getting any referrals? Any salesperson on this live cast right now, by all means, in the chat area, tell us, how many referrals do you get a month even? This is a big, big, big thing, isn't it, Bob?
Well, it is. I mean, there are four, what I would call benefits, certainly could say byproducts of referrals. Number one, it's easier to set the appointment with a referred prospect because you're going in on borrowed influence. Number two, price tends to be less of an issue with a referred prospect. Now, that doesn't mean it's a non-issue. It's an issue, but it's much less of an issue because, again, you're going in on borrowed influence. So because of that, you can sell on value rather than low price. The third benefit or byproduct is that it's simply easier to complete the transaction or close the sale, however you want to say it. Why? Well, you're going in on borrowed trust, what we would call vicarious experience. And fourth, perhaps the most powerful byproduct of all of a referred prospect is that that person is already of the mindset that that's how you do business because that's how they met you. So in their world, in their model, in their paradigm, you meet your prospects through referral, you sell on value rather than low price, you complete the transaction, and you receive more referrals.
All right, so conceptually understandable. Is getting referrals hard, Bob?
It all depends on the situation. You know, whether it's hard or easy is probably up to the person and the situation, and there are also certain markets in which they don't generally refer as easily as they might in others. So I can't really say yes or no and say that coming from a, you know, without just being really dogmatic about something where there really isn't a yes or no answer. But I would say regardless of whether it's a little bit more difficult or a lot more difficult in your particular industry or profession, by doing the right things the correct way, you're going to have a much better chance of obtaining those referrals.
Perfect. Well, that brings us to our next point, which I personally believe most people don't go for referrals because of fears that it will be hard or fears of rejection or this kind of thing. What types of fears have you seen from, you know, a lot of your clients, a lot of your people that you've given seminars to, people have come up to you afterwards? Some of the biggest fears you've encountered?
Well, again, you hit it on the head when you said fear of rejection. That's the biggest one. You know, what if I ask for referrals and this person says no? You know, what will happen? Well, actually nothing, but it's still a fear. You know, what if I appear needy by asking for referrals? Well, if you do it correctly, you won't appear needy. So that's, while it's good not to appear needy, that should never be an issue. What about talking past the sale? Well, talking past the sale is never a good thing, but that has nothing to do with professionally asking for referrals. Talking past the sales means there's enough information for that person to say yes, but even after they've said yes, you keep talking and talking and talking, and they change their mind. That's talking past the sale. Referrals has nothing to do with that. In fact, asking for referrals and receiving them is a great way to really end the conversation because when they've provided you with referrals, first it means that they've been able to come down off the emotional high that they probably bought the product from, because people buy emotionally, but again, logic is very important afterwards. So that they understand logically why they bought and they feel good about it. That's how a sale really is more apt to stick. So when you're there and long enough to ask for referrals, you've been able to answer some of those questions that they might have that are lurking. And when they refer you to someone else, you know, they feel good about you, which is one reason that they did agree to give the referrals. And as long as you asked correctly, the chances are you will be able to obtain some referrals. And that goes to that last fear. Well, I don't know how to ask correctly. And that would be worth fearing if you didn't know. So the antidote for that is to learn how to ask correctly.
Well, why don't we, for all of our audience, solve that with you giving us some steps of how we go about asking for referrals?
Well, different businesses are different, of course, in the way you would do it because you're dealing with a different clientele. But to provide a generic answer that anyone can then use to shape for their individual business, one of the best pieces of advice I ever read on that was from Tom Hopkins about 30 years ago when I read his book, How to Master the Art of Selling. And what he talked about is what often happens is you'll say to somebody, do you know anyone who, or who do you know who, and the person says something that will respond with something like, well, I can't think of anybody right now, but when I do, I'll call you or let you know, which of course they usually don't do, only because, once out of sight, out of mind. It really wasn't their fault they couldn't think of anyone because most people know about 250 people. So when we say, is there anyone who, or do you know anyone who, or who do you know who, a collage of 250 nameless, faceless people just sort of dances past their head. It's too big for them to see. So what Tom Hopkins suggested is that we funnel down their world into small groups of people they can picture in their mind's eye. And that makes it easier for them to come up with names. And once that happens, it will be easier for them to come up with more names because the self-inflicted pressure they put on themselves is now off. So let's run through that very quickly. Let's say Gary is either a customer or just a referral source. Who knows sometimes he may not be in the market for what you sell, but knows other people who are. And you say to Gary's a golfer, and you might ask Gary, I know you golf a lot. He says, oh, I golf every Sunday afternoon. Well, do you golf with different people or sort of with the same foursome? Oh, same people every time. Harry Brown, Michael Cloud, Dr. Mary Ruart, the four of us have been golfing buddies for years. Well, now he's just pictured three people in his mind. So now you might say, would Harry or Michael or Dr. Mary be, whatever, so, some people I should speak with, or which of those, if any, do you feel might be open to, or however you would do it based on your business. Now let's say let's take another frame, and maybe all three of them, maybe none of them, maybe one of them. Let's go to another frame. He's a member of his Kiwanis Club, and you're not going to say who in Kiwanis, or do you know anyone in Kiwanis, because it might be too big a club. Then we're back to that same challenge. But you might say, is there anyone within your Kiwanis Club that you sit next to every time, every week, or who you're particularly good friends with, or serve on a committee with? Well, now again, so if he comes up with one or two names, and you ask if any of those. So what happens is you can go to a few different ones, and again, the person knows, likes, and trusts you. They're very comfortable with you. And you can do this as long as they're comfortable with it. It's not an issue. And what you're doing by asking that way, as Tom Hopkins suggested, is you're creating the environment for their victory rather than for their failure. And so when they come up with a couple of names, now they start thinking of other people. But you can also, again, depending upon what you do, you can ask them who their neighbors are. You can run the alphabet job list. Who's their A, accountant, B, banker, C, their chiropractor, D, dentist, E, electrician, F, financial advisor, or there's all sorts of. So be as prepared as possible going into the conversation so you don't have to be thinking about it while you're doing it. Practice it a few times and you'll be amazed at how many referrals, really good qualified referrals, you can receive.
Well, Bob, thank you for that. And now what I'd like to do, because we're running really late, but this is probably one of the most important pillars if really in any aspect of our lives for everybody listening. This is a big portion of Bob's book, Adversaries into Allies, and it's a massive portion of understanding and becoming aware of what we call the clash of belief systems. And I couldn't get my little stencil to write clash up top, but it's
okay.
But it's the clash of belief systems, Bob. And some things just quickly off the top of my head from your book is consider the source. Is understanding where individuals come from, or that other person comes from, or what they might perceive to be as reality, or what they see as reality. So, what is the clash of belief systems, Bob?
Well, belief itself is simply a subjective truth. It's the truth as we understand the truth to be, which doesn't mean it's the truth. It means it's our truth. Sometimes our truth is the truth, but not always, and often far less than what we might think. A belief system itself is simply the lens through which we see the world. Okay, and it's based on a combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, movies, popular culture, everything we touch, taste, see, hear, smell, what have you. But it tends to be pretty much set in place by the time we're little more than toddlers. Our basic belief system is set, and everything after that just kind of sort of adds on to that. So we grow up and live our lives often seeing the world a certain way and not even being aware that that's the case. It's unconscious. And it's the same with that other person with whom you're about to have a potentially difficult situation or interaction with. They see the world through their personal belief system or personal operating system, and they're not even aware of it. So that really can lay the groundwork for a real clash of belief systems. So what we need to do is not necessarily feel we have to understand their belief system. They probably don't understand their own belief system, but we need to be aware it's there, it's an operation, and that it's only by acknowledging that and being aware, understanding the clash of belief systems, that we can create the environment where a mutually beneficial situation can ensue.
Now, Bob, I mean, you touched base on it a bit just a second ago, but it's the why we need to understand this, and really, how do we start going about understanding it? Because, you know, we'll be in meetings or in transportation for myself, you know, daily I'll be dealing with a situation, a challenge, if you will, and the individual on the other end of the phone or the individual on the other end of the email, whether it be parents listening that are, you know, involved in negotiations, if you will, for your children's hockey, soccer, baseball, whatever the case may be. This clash of belief system comes up daily, multiple times a day. And what I'd like to really share with everybody, or have you share with everybody, Bob, is why we really need to understand that. What are some of the benefits we as individuals get from understanding belief systems? And I'll share just one quickly that I've been so blessed to have understood years ago when I first read one of your books, Endless Referrals, and I said, I always consider the source. So anything that happens, and if somebody goes completely off the wire, and you know, whether some of the trucks that I use or the partners that I use are late, or, you know, something gets said this way but it happens this way and the other person's completely flying off the handle, the first thing I do is stop and I say, Dan, consider the source. And it is so apparent in our everyday lives when you're dealing with friends, family, parents. I do a lot of coaching for hockey, and parents of the other children. You really got to stop and consider the source, or you could drive yourself nuts.
Yeah, if you don't understand the clash of belief systems, then you're going to find yourself daily and constantly in situations where you think you're talking about the same thing with someone, where in reality you're talking about something totally different, because they're seeing that word, that term, what have you, differently than how you're seeing it. And so what happens is the entire premise ends up being false. So all the logic in the world, no matter how great it is all for naught if we're coming from two totally different premises, or beliefs in this case.
Well, and that's what brings us, I mean, right into this from the sales eye, and I know all of you really like my picture of the eye there. From the sales eye, this is a really, really important topic, because especially in sales, if you're not discussing the same thing, but you think you are, it can lead to so many problems, right, Bob?
Well, absolutely. When it comes to sales, remember, it goes back to something we said earlier, value is always in the eyes of the beholder. That has a lot to do with beliefs. Why? Well, let's say that you believe that the great thing about this product is it's low price. That's what you see and that's what they've been telling you at the company and in the launch, how this is just such a low price. So you go in and you start selling this to this person at this low price, and it's just you're confounded by the fact that this person doesn't seem to be responding to you. Why? Because that person, while they would, you know, all things being equal, would like to have a price that's low as opposed to a price that's high. That's not their buying motive. Okay, they're all about convenience. They're not about low price. but because your belief system says, oh yeah, well, I that's the important thing to me, you assume, because as human beings, and this is key about understanding belief systems, we tend to believe that everybody else sees the world as we do. How could it be any different? We see it as we see it. This is why you hear people say, oh, everybody feels that way. Oh, everybody is more concerned about the price than anything else. Oh, nobody but everybody and nobody often means us and people who think like we do. And so that person's their buying trigger, their hot button is convenience, convenience, convenience. And you're talking about price, price, price. Clash of belief systems. And remember, value is always in the eyes of the beholder.
Well, Bob, I mean, that brings us to our last pillar of the 4 pillars, which is our action steps. What kind of action steps could we take today? And anyone watching on this live cast, or when we do a replay, anyone on the replay, what can they start doing right now to start really transforming those belief systems so they can start hitting those trajectory moments?
Well, the first thing is consciousness. It's being aware. It's being aware that we see the world through our own set of eyes, through our own set of beliefs, and understanding that that is not going to typically be productive unless we're dealing with someone who's pretty much exactly like us, and we cannot depend on that for our success. So the first thing is to be conscious that that's how, as human beings, we operate, and to be conscious that that's how other human beings operate. Once we understand this, now we can take all those steps. We can understand, we can know what questions we're supposed to ask. We can find out from others what they believe is of the highest value and so forth. You know, one great thing to do is to ask your customers and clients, you know, we were talking about the different ways to separate yourself, distinguish yourself as you add value to others, is ask them, what is it about me or this company or this product, what have you, that is the reason that you buy from us, that you do business with us, that you tell others about us? And often, even though people are different, they're gonna tell you things that you didn't know, because you think, based on your belief system, that they're doing it for a certain reason, and it's not necessarily true. So one of the greatest experiences and learning lessons you'll have is finding out from your customers and clients why they actually value you and what you do.
Well, Bob, thank you so much, and I apologize for the delay. And to all of our viewers, I know we said it was like a 20-30 minute webinar, and we're now sitting at 49 minutes. I am very sorry. I apologize for not completely respecting that time. But as you can see, and I hope this additional time has served you in so many ways and given you some really great ideas about all of this. There is going to be a replay you'll get an email on, so no fear if you've had to get up and walk away. Quickly, before we go, I've put a pop-up on the side, because Adversaries into Allies is such a fantastic book, no matter what type of sales you are in. Some of the information, probably right from page 4 on, can just help you in so many ways. So, Bob, I've put that up there. I hope you don't mind. I know we said it would be a 100% content, but just I wanted to give everybody a place to go, if you will, where they could get that book. And, of course, on that Amazon page is a lot of Bob's other books, Endless Referrals, The Art of Persuasion, and so on and so forth. So, Bob, thank you so much for being here. We truly, truly appreciate it. And you know what, my friend? Our conversations, our little conversations we have are just always so fantastic.
Well, I always enjoy them and always enjoy speaking with you, Dan. Thanks for the great work you do, and keep it up.
Thanks, Bob. And to everybody, have a blessed day. Joy to you in every precious moment. And remember, the past is history, the future a mystery. The gift is now. That's why we call it the present. Take care. Have a great day. Wasn't that awesome? I mean, what an incredible individual, isn't he? So, I hope you enjoyed that again. If you did enjoy it and you want more of this type of content, more in-depth content, please visit dandeigan.com. That's DANDEIGAN.com. And check out the homepage, because there's something there for HPLS Monthly. I'd love for you to become an insider with HPLS Monthly and get a lot of this exclusive content that really, I mean, there's hundreds of other videos like this, hundreds of other training programs and schedules, and really thoughtful stuff that we have, they're just on the back end that you don't get to see. The general public doesn't really get to see unless you're an insider. And for $47 a month to be part of HPLS Monthly, to get the 4 pillars of personal greatness and a bunch of other bonuses, I think it'd be worth it. So I encourage you to check out dandeigan.com, and I hope to see you on the inside, my friend. Until then, again, I'm going to say it again and again and again. Go out there every day and make every call a learning moment and crush your sales. Take care.